discuss the situation in Libya, we're now joined live by Dmitry Rogozin, Russia's ambassador to NATO, joining us live from Brussels. Mr. Rogozin, now NATO is saying it has no plans to finish its operations in Libya, in the foreseeable future at least, citing there's still danger to civilians. How legitimate do you think that claim is?
I think we have to be very careful with regard to what official NATO representatives say today, because their statements about tens of thousands of bombs and other ammunition being dropped on Libya, that they had no adverse effect on the civilians. That's what NATO has been claiming. That is very hard to believe. So that defines that we should be careful with regard to official statements from Brussels.
Several different reports have suggested that there were in fact British special forces instructing the rebels during the battle for Tripoli. Boots on the ground already. Those are despite promises to the contrary. Like you're saying, you can't always believe what NATO says, but why is that, and why do so many people believe what NATO says?
Well, it's typical when certain countries that are NATO member states are waging a war, interfering into a civil war into a country far away from NATO's sphere of control. Nowadays we can say that France and Britain and Americans are deeply involved in the conflict, but NATO as an organization is not involved officially. Well, that is a typical military propaganda scheme.
How possible is it, do you think, that Resolution 1973 scenario could be repeated, say, in Syria with the violence that we're seeing there?
With regard to Libya, the 1973 resolution was used as a chewing gum by NATO, so to say. I think that NATO might be deliberately demonstrating its disregard for the UN Security Council, to demonstrate that NATO is equal to the United Nations nowadays and will be getting even more significant and powerful in the future. As far as Syria is concerned, I think that there will be no military operation by NATO or by any Western country, because any kind of military action against a country such as Syria will inevitably affect the security of Israel. And I think Israel is doing its best right now to stop any violence against such a big neighbor as Syria.
Military-wise, do you think, what were the chances of a rebel win if NATO hadn't intervened, if they didn't get involved?
I think that NATO basically stole the victory, but from whom? That's not significant. NATO stole the victory, that's a fact.
Could you go a little further into detail about what you mean when you say NATO stole the victory?
Well, the conclusion that we can make based on this situation is much more significant than the situation in Libya itself. NATO is turning into a global policeman nowadays, using any resolutions taken by the UN Security Council to serve its own interests, without looking at the interests of other groups, even the interests of the people they claim to be liberating in Libya. Actually, knowing NATO, I doubt very seriously that NATO was actually interested by the security and interests of ordinary Libyans when they were interfering in that conflict.
It's looking nowadays like the rebels are likely to keep control over Libya. Do you think they're capable of forming a stable government?
I don't think that is possible. First of all, because so far, the rebels were only united by a single objective, and that is to bring down Gaddafi's regime, which they hated for different reasons. Those rebels are composed by very different ethnic tribes and political groups. There are various Western interests that support the rebels, and I'm not only referring to the Western coalition, but also to some countries within the Middle East, including such such a nation as Iran. So now that their enemy is down, rebels will inevitably meet some interior strides and some interior disputes. So I think that this post-conflict resolution in Libya will be a chance for certain Western countries to secure their permanent military presence in Libya, with the goal of controlling Libya's oil resources.
The U.S. and Britain are now unfreezing Gaddafi's assets to hand them over to the rebels. There is a bank, as we know, in Vienna that is reported to be considered doing the same, but holding back until it knows who exactly the money will be going to. Why were the U.S. and Britain so quick to release those assets to the rebels?
I think we should only be looking for one interest in this situation, the oil interest. They are interested in defining their favorite one to inherit the oil wealth of Libya. Libya is a country with small human resources, that is a relatively small population, but at the same time it is very rich in oil resources. And the 21st century has already introduced itself to us as the era of wars for resources. The resources are running short. The consumption in Western countries is not going to go down anytime soon. This means that there will be wars for new regions and new resources. And the actions of specific Western countries, as well as the entire coalition, such as NATO, will be gaining momentum and becoming even more brass in the future.
All right, well, we, of course, will continue to keep a very close eye on what's happening in Libya. For now, Dmitry Rogozin, Russia's ambassador to NATO, live on the line with us from Brussels. Thank you very much for that.